Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Chapel Hill Bulldog staff. I welcome you back from your hopefully much relaxed spring break. If not, I hope that it was at least a good time to get some things done. There's nothing wrong with either one. But anyways, I appreciate you joining me to watch this presentation. This presentation is basically used for teachers to kind of guide you all into making your recommendations for designated supports and star recommendations for our English learners. So that's what my goal is to give you that knowledge, give you some links, some helpful tools and tips and tricks to make the best decisions for our English learners in time for STAR. First and foremost, this presentation, if you haven't gotten the link to the presentation, make sure that you ask for it. Feel free to email me or reach out to your LPAC administrator. They will have this information. But before you get started, make sure that you do click on this STAR Accessibility Educator Guide picture. It has a link embedded and will take you directly to the form. Let's get started, shall we? So first and foremost, we have to understand, well, what does STAR look like for our English learners? What type of versions are there? Is there anything different for our English learners than from our other students? And there are a couple of differences. So we do have the general STAR in English in all of the different content areas, but then we also do have the STAR Spanish version of the test for all 4 content areas, 3 through 6th grade. Since 6th grade is our elementary grade, we have the Spanish version all the way up to 6th grade. Now, here's the thing is that we also have STAR Alt 2. We also have 3 through 8. We have all content areas. When it comes to high school, though, high school and actually 7th through 12th, we only have the English version of the test. Unfortunately, we have not gotten to the point to where we have a STAR Spanish version for our newcomers. So hopefully the state will get there at some point. In the meantime, let's look at STAR Spanish. So if you are secondary, you can tune me out for a little bit, but it's actually also really good information for you to know that these are some of the decisions and some of the versions of the tests that are available when students are actually younger and participating in a bilingual program. So for elementary grade levels 3 through 6, teachers can actually recommend the STAR Spanish version, but when is it appropriate? That's the question. We want to make sure that we're making these decisions correctly based on being well informed and not just an estimated guess, right? Well, to begin with, it is appropriate for students that are currently participating in a bilingual program who are receiving most of their academic instruction in Spanish, but it's also going to be appropriate even for a student who's participating in the ESL program. You might have a native speaker who has recently come from a Spanish-speaking country who is a recent immigrant and is sitting in your classroom right now. But let's say their parents, they want English-only instruction for their children, and therefore they are still participating in the ESL program because they believe in giving them some type of linguistic support as they are transitioning. That might be an option. That might be a situation that you are dealing with. So that could be a scenario that is there, and STAR Spanish can still be appropriate for them. Now, the only type of student where a student cannot participate and have STAR Spanish recommended for them is a parent denial. And a parent denial, by definition, is a student whose parent has denied both the bilingual and the ESL program. So if they have denied both, they may not have the STAR Spanish recommended for them. Okay? And that also includes for them to actually have any linguistic accommodations in the classroom available for them because parents have denied. Now, there is a possibility that you want to make that phone call to the parents and say, hey, this is your student, your child is struggling a little bit. I can tell it might be based off of language. I would like to support them in my class and give these type of supports. Would you grant for them to at least participate in the ESL program so I can actually support them in language, because you have denied services from both programs. Now, a recent immigrant, just to kind of get a definition for what a recent immigrant is, by definition, the federal definition for them is it's a student who is not U.S. born and who has been in a U.S. school for 3 years or less. They have to meet both of those eligibility requirements, not one, but both. When they meet both criteria, then that student is officially a recent immigrant, and they have the STAR Spanish version of the test available to them. So this could also be for a student who has recently transferred from a different district, who is currently participating in a bilingual program, but now they're in an ESL program, and they still absolutely received substantial academic support in Spanish. They still need that support. That is still an option for them. If you have any questions, if you have any doubts, always feel free to reach out, and I'd be more than happy to clarify any of that information to help guide you in your decision making for our students. Now, here's the thing. When teachers actually make the recommendations for our students, this is almost kind of like going into Burger King and getting into a different kind of combo meal. I want a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Well, decisions for the STAR test can actually work a little bit like that. And let me give you an explanation. So here's the thing. You might have a student who's very strong in Spanish and reading, but they can actually command and command the English language in math. So in math, they actually do really well. Well, so here's the thing. As a teacher, I can recommend that for a student, let's call them student X, that for student X, I can recommend the reading test in STAR to be given in Spanish and the math test to be given in English. And I have to have, though, justified documentation that says why and gives an explanation for why the student needs that type of support. So that's a big piece. That's a big takeaway, is that when you are making the decisions, they always have to be well justified. We have to have that, and we have to have that in the required documentation, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, in the meantime, though, let's say you were talking about that recent immigrant. Well, if that recent immigrant hasn't gotten as much academic English language, then it would be appropriate to give all 4 content tests in Spanish. That is a possibility. The LPAC, however, will review those decisions and make sure that everything is okay, especially making sure that the required documentation is there to support that decision. Because what we don't want to have is that we are making decisions without actual justification. Because what might end up happening, which we don't want to have, is that we end up hindering our students by giving an accommodation that a student is not used to. And this is actually one of them, can be one of them, considered to be one of them. It might end up hindering them versus actually supporting them. Now, what do we mean by it has to be well justified? Well, and how do you prove that? What sort of justification do you need? Well, one of the things that I share with teachers as far as what you can utilize to help guide your decisions is look at their data and where. If your campus has been testing in both languages, you can see where they have been predominantly more what language they have been predominantly more successful in. So if we look at this example in 4th grade, this was from last year, the year before, we're looking at a 4th grade RLA unit test. So here, when the student took it in Spanish, they scored a 69% and they met approaches. Okay. That same year, they had taken a what looks like that same unit test in fourth grade, and they scored a 46. So they did not meet. That to me is a very well justification that the student still depends on their native language and they will be more successful taking the STAR reading in Spanish versus taking it in English. Now, when it comes to these points, this is what I also tell teachers. If the difference is only by 2 points, 3 points, 5 points, 6, 7 points, there really isn't much difference in the commanding of the languages. That means that a student isn't more dominant in one than the other. They're pretty much about that same level. But when there is a large disparity, like in this example here, this is very well justified that it would be in the best interest of the child to actually recommend the student to take the test in Spanish for reading. And you can do the same thing with math, you can do the same thing with science, and so on and so forth. But this is basically how you will make those decisions. Now, we also have a generic way of making these test decisions based on the language because of the dual program language that we have here in our district. Currently, we are operating by the Gomez and Gomez bilingual model, which means when it comes to the dual language model, students are learning both languages 50-50, 50% in English, 50% in Spanish. And so the purpose and the primary goal of a dual language program is for students to become fully biliterate. That is the ultimate goal. And so when it comes to assessing students, we have to have assessments that are reflected in both languages so that we can actually assess students of how they are doing in both languages. We have to know, how are they doing in Spanish? How are they doing in English? So generically speaking, when it comes to our STAR decisions, we typically, in our districts, we follow this decision-making piece or system, if you will. So for third grade, your students will typically be tested reading in Spanish, math and English, and science. You can use the AWARE documentation to see which one would be the best route for them. Fourth through sixth grade, it's the exact same thing. Reading in Spanish, math and English, science, it could go either way. Now, here's the thing. Like I said before, we have to make sure that it's well justified, right? This is well justified because this is a program decision. But what I mean is that if you're going to test a student in math and Spanish, we have to have justification for it. And one of your justifications could be that the student still heavily requires and the support still in their native language. And that could be because they are a recent immigrant. And there's absolutely nothing wrong if you go against what I'm sharing you right here on this line, that student's going to take the math test, STAR test in Spanish versus in English. As long as it's well justified, it is okay. Again, if you feel like you need clarification, if you're really unsure, please feel free to reach out to me. Don't be embarrassed. I much rather us make a collaborative decision than say that you have touched base with someone from the district to help guide and make this decision. That way we're all on the same page and we have helped each other. All right. So, what are the requirements for you guys as teachers when it comes to making these sort of recommendations? So, your recommendations is documented via elevation. This is what keeps you guys from sitting in those LPAC meetings. So, I'm trying to help you help us. Okay. Now, here's the thing is that those instructional accommodation forms from elevation that you guys have been filling out throughout the year, that is your documentation that justifies your final decision and recommendation for STAR. So You guys have filled out at this point possibly 2 forms online. For sure 1, but I just asked the LPAC administrators to communicate to you guys to fill out the second one. So you should have that filled out by March 22nd. I believe that's the deadline. By that point, you would have filled out both of those forms. That basically is your way of saying, this is what type of instructional accommodation I have been giving my English learners in my class throughout the year. And that's what's going to justify the recommendation of the designated support you will recommend for your English learner come later in this month for STAR. Hope that makes sense. But here's the thing, is that here I have helpful links for you guys. The link is actually for the same document, but there's different sections of the link that are there for different reasons. Let's see if this works. Apparently it's not, which is a good thing, which is okay, because that's what I have the next slides for. But here's the thing. On page 29, I have some examples for you of what those supports might look like in the classroom. So you might think, okay, I've been giving sentence stems to my students. I've been giving graphic organizers for my students. What does that look like in STAR? How do I know if that's a content and language support? So when I fill out the last form for a STAR recommendation, I know that I'm selecting the right one. So that's going to give you some of those examples of what they look like in the classroom. Now, in that link on that form, pages 27 to 28, that gives you an idea of what those actual content and language supports look like on the actual STAR test 2.0. So is it a rollover? Does it highlight it for them? Does it say it for them? Does it say it for them in their native language? What does that look like on the actual STAR test? This is really important for you guys because this will guide you in your decision making, in making those decisions for your students. So please be sure to look at that link, that PDF, pages 27 to 29. It actually also contains really great information for special ed students as well, as far as what type of supports for them look like on STAR. So it has a wealth of knowledge, definitely a very useful and necessary read before we make any type of recommendations. So here's at page 29. If you notice, this says classroom designated support examples that link to STAR content and language support. So what is it that you're doing in the classroom that's considered a content and language support? So as a teacher, if you isolate specific information to focus the student on the core concept being taught, you tend to do this, you are providing the student, a content and language support. And if they depend on this type of support in the classroom, then they will need it for the STAR test. Let's see. If you as a teacher provide formulas needed to solve a problem, this is considered a content and language support. So that would be a recommendation that you would want to provide for that student. Teacher provides visual aids, demonstrations, photographs, art to define or clarify vocabulary. This is also considered a content and language support. So if you tend to provide this type of support for students in the class, then on that form and elevation, you want to make sure that you select that as a recommendation for your student or STAR or EOC. Now, this is that page 27 to 28 that I was talking about. This gives you an idea of what content and language supports look like on the actual STAR and STAR Spanish tests. So pop up, for example, it can define literary terms. It can direct student attention to parts of the grade-specific reference materials, provide clarify information for a graphic organizer, political cartoon, or map, provide a visual representation in the passage, question, answer choices, or constructed response items by adding graphics and photographs or even animations. This would definitely be something that I would need. But however, this gives you an idea of what those supports look like, content and language supports look like on STAR, especially if STAR 2.0 is new. This gives you a very good idea of what's now available for the new test. So elevation, you're going to do two things. The part that's on the left is the instructional accommodations. So this is what you currently have been doing in the classroom throughout the year. So remember, it's those two forms that you will complete by March 22nd for your students. And then finally, once I push out the testing accommodation form, recommendation form, teacher recommendation form for STAR, this is what it looks like. It's grayed out because this one has already been completed. But here's the thing is that the only two designated supports that the LPAC can recommend for language for our English learners are content language supports and oral admin, which includes text to speech. So those are going to be the only ones that you will be able to select on this form right here where my mouse is. Now, here's the thing. I want to point out that this is where content and language supports. Here's a decision. So you would select this if that is a viable need for your student. And the other part is going to be oral administration, right? Those are the two. But here's the thing. If you recommend oral admin, please also make sure that you select text to speech as well. Both of those. Oral admin, text, and goes hand in hand with text to speech. Please select both. Other than that, guys, we used to have, what was it called? Extra time. Extra time is no longer considered a designated support. It's considered now an accessibility feature, which means that it's available for all. And no one has to actually make an official documented decision on it. So for our English learners, we now only have two designated supports available for STAR and EOCs, content and language supports, and oral admin, which includes text to speech. Guys, this is it. I hope that it was informative. I hope it cleared up some things. I hope it didn't confuse you more than where you had started. But either way, please make sure you email me with any questions, or you can ask an LPAC administrator at a campus near you. Thank you guys. I appreciate your time with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.